The floorboards beneath their feet groaned with each step, threatening to give way after decades of neglect. But what they discovered hidden in the walls of their crumbling shack would transform their final years from abandonment to unimaginable wealth. The treasure had been there all along, waiting 70 years for someone desperate enough to tear apart the rotting walls. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to smash subscribe, because tomorrow we have an extraordinary tale that will leave you speechless. Walter and Evelyn Hartwell had lived in the same dilapidated shack on the outskirts of Cedar Falls for 43 years. The structure, generous to call it a house, consisted of 3 rooms held together by determination and expired dreams. Paint peeled from every surface like diseased skin. The roof leaked in 17 different places, each marked by a bucket or pan that played its own note during rainstorms, creating a symphony of decay. Windows held together with duct tape filtered light through spiderweb cracks, casting fractured patterns across bare wooden floors that had never known the luxury of carpeting. Walter, at 78, moved with the careful precision of someone who understood that one wrong step could mean disaster. His hands, gnarled from decades of manual labor at the steel mill before it closed, gripped his homemade walking stick carved from a hickory branch. Beside him, Evelyn, 76, maintained her dignity despite circumstances that would have broken younger spirits. Her silver hair, still long and braided each morning with arthritic fingers, framed a face that poverty had etched but not defeated. They had raised 4 children within these walls. Marcus, their eldest, now a successful surgeon in Seattle. Diana, who married a tech executive and lived in a gated community in Connecticut. Robert, a corporate lawyer in Chicago with a corner office and a 7-figure salary. And youngest Sarah, who ran a chain of upscale boutiques in Los Angeles. Each child had escaped poverty's grip, launched into prosperity by parents who sacrificed everything for their education. "Remember when Diana used to do her homework right here?" Evelyn asked one morning, her weathered hand tracing the kitchen table's scarred surface. The same table where she'd served thousands of meals cobbled together from food bank donations and discount groceries, making magic from scraps to keep her children fed. Walter nodded, lost in memories of better times. "She was so determined to get into Yale, stayed up past midnight every night, studying by candlelight when we couldn't pay the electric bill. Those sacrifices had paid off magnificently for their children. Scholarships and student loans, co-signed by parents who'd never missed a payment despite going hungry themselves, had opened doors to worlds Walter and Evelyn could barely imagine. Their children had soared, leaving the nest not just to fly, but to never look back. The last time Marcus visited was 8 years ago, when he needed their signatures on paperwork to remove them as beneficiaries from his life insurance policy. "It's just a formality," he'd explained, not meeting their eyes. "My financial advisor says it's cleaner this way, with Stephanie and the kids being the primary beneficiaries." Diana's visits had dwindled to Christmas cards that arrived increasingly late, if at all. The last one came in February, 2 months after the holiday, with a generic printed message and a signature that looked like it was signed by an assistant. Robert had been more direct in his abandonment. After making partner at his firm, he'd sent a letter through his secretary explaining that maintaining contact with his background could negatively impact his career trajectory. "I'm sure you understand," the letter concluded, though understanding wasn't what filled Evelyn's heart as she read those words through tears. Sarah simply vanished. Her phone number changed, emails bounced back, and the private investigator they couldn't afford confirmed she'd legally changed her last name to distance herself from her origins. "They're ashamed of us," Walter had said one night, the words hanging in the darkness of their bedroom like a curse. "They're ashamed of where they came from," Evelyn corrected, "but we gave them everything we had." Everything included their health, sacrificed to double shifts and side jobs. Their savings, emptied repeatedly for tuition, textbooks, and opportunities. Their comfort, foregone so their children could have proper clothes, decent shoes, and the chance to fit in with peers from better neighborhoods. Even their retirement, mortgaged against hopes that successful children would remember the parents who made their success possible. But gratitude, they learned, wasn't hereditary. The government assistance they qualified for barely covered basic survival. Food stamps stretched thin by the month's third week. Medicare covered Walter's heart medication, but not Evelyn's arthritis treatments. The heating assistance program had been cut, leaving them to choose between warmth and food during brutal winters. "Maybe we should sell," Walter suggested one morning, looking around their crumbling home. A decade ago, a developer had offered them $30,000 for the property, planning to demolish the shack and build a convenience store. They'd refused then, clinging to the only stability they'd known. "Who'd buy this place now?" Evelyn asked. The neighborhood had deteriorated further. Drug deals happened openly on the corner. Gunshots punctuated weekend nights. Their shack, worthless as it seemed, was still shelter. The ceiling in their bedroom had partially collapsed during last spring's storms. They'd moved their mattress to the living room, sleeping surrounded by their few possessions. A radio that only received one station clearly, books from the library's free pile, and photographs of children who no longer acknowledged their existence. Walter's pride had kept him from seeking charity beyond government programs, but that pride was eroding like the walls around them. He'd started visiting the food bank, standing in line with other forgotten elderly, their stories written in bent backs and worn shoes. The volunteers were kind, treating them with dignity that their own children had abandoned. "Mr. Hartwell, we have some extra canned goods today," Jennifer, a young volunteer, would say, slipping additional items into his bag. She never made him ask, understanding that sometimes the last thing to go was self-respect. Evelyn had swallowed her own pride differently, taking in mending from neighbors who could pay a few dollars for hemmed pants or repaired seams. Her eyes, weakened by age and poor lighting, struggled with the fine work, but her fingers remembered the motion from years of patching her children's clothes. Their isolation was nearly complete. No car, having sold their ancient sedan years ago for emergency medical expenses. No phone, the landline disconnected for non-payment, and cell phones, an impossible luxury. No internet, leaving them disconnected from a world that had moved online. Their children might as well have lived on different planets. The mail carrier, Thomas, was one of their few regular human contacts. He'd sometimes linger, sharing neighborhood news or commenting on the weather. He'd noticed the lack of family correspondence, but was too polite to mention it directly. "Beautiful day, isn't it, Mrs. Hartwell?" he'd say, handing over the usual collection of bills and advertisements. "Every day above ground is beautiful," Evelyn would reply, a response that had become their regular exchange. It was Thomas who'd first noticed something odd about their mail. Between the past due notices and grocery circulars, official-looking letters had started arriving. Letters from banks they didn't have accounts with, investment firms they'd never heard of, lawyers representing estates they couldn't imagine being connected to. "Looks like important mail today," Thomas commented, eyeing the return addresses. Walter had dismissed them as scams, schemes targeting the elderly with promises of wealth. He'd seen the television reports about seniors losing their life savings to fraudsters. With nothing to steal, he figured they were safe from such predators. But the letters kept coming, certified mail requiring signatures, express packages marked urgent, phone calls to the payphone at the corner store with messages left for them about pressing financial matters. "It's probably a mistake," Walter insisted. But Evelyn noticed the increasing frequency and urgency of the correspondence. Their daily routine revolved around survival. Morning meant checking which bills were most overdue. Afternoon meant walking to the food bank or library. Evening meant preparing whatever meal they could manage on their hot plate, since the stove had stopped working years ago. One particularly harsh winter morning, with snow filtering through gaps in the walls and ice forming inside the windows, Walter made a decision that would change everything. The latest letter from a law firm had been particularly insistent, threatening legal action if they didn't respond. "Maybe we should at least call them," Evelyn suggested, her breath visible in the frigid air. "Use the phone at the library." Walter's resistance finally crumbled. Whatever scam these people were running, at least the library would be warm. They bundled into their threadbare coats, Evelyn wrapping her feet in plastic bags before putting on shoes with holes in the soles, and began the mile-long walk through the snow. The Cedar Falls Public Library was a sanctuary in more ways than one. Heat, freely given. Books, portals to better worlds. Internet access, though neither Walter nor Evelyn had mastered the computers. And most importantly, dignity. The librarians treated all patrons equally, whether they arrived in luxury cars or on foot with snow-soaked shoes. Walter, Evelyn, good morning, greeted Martin, the head librarian who'd known them for decades. What brings you out in this weather? Need to make a phone call, Walter admitted, producing the latest letter. These folks keep insisting we contact them. Martin glanced at the letterhead, his eyebrows rising slightly at the prestigious firm's name. Would you like some privacy? You can use the phone in my office. As Evelyn waited in the reading area, warming her hands on a cup of free coffee, Walter dialed the number with trembling fingers. The voice that answered was professional, almost urgent when he identified himself. Mr. Hartwell, thank God. We've been trying to reach you for months. I'm James Morrison from Morrison Cade and Associates. We represent the estate of Clarence Mitchell. I don't know any Clarence Mitchell, Walter said, already regretting the call. He was your mother's cousin, Mr. Hartwell. He passed away 14 months ago without immediate heirs. Our genealogical research identified you as one of his closest living relatives. Walter's mother had been dead for 30 years. Her family history was a mystery she'd taken to her grave, having been orphaned young and raised by various relatives. I don't understand. Mr. Mitchell was eccentric. He lived modestly but invested brilliantly. His estate is substantial. However, there's a complication. Here it comes, Walter thought. The scam. They'd want money up front for processing fees or taxes. Money he didn't have for a fortune that didn't exist. What kind of complication? Mr. Mitchell was very specific in his will. He left detailed instructions about how his assets should be distributed. Part of the estate was left to various charities. Part was set aside for distant relatives he'd researched but never met. And a significant portion? Well, that's where it gets unusual. Walter waited, saying nothing. He hid it, physically hid it. His will provides clues to its location, but they're cryptic. We've hired investigators, but so far no one has been able to decipher his riddles. As one of the beneficiaries, you have the right to attempt to find it yourself. This sounds like a movie plot, Walter said flatly. I understand your skepticism. Many beneficiaries have had the same reaction, but I assure you, this is legitimate. We've already distributed over $3 million from his conventional accounts to various beneficiaries. The hidden portion? Well, Mr. Mitchell claimed it was worth significantly more. How much more? He mentioned 9 figures in his video will. But frankly, we think he was exaggerating. Elderly people sometimes inflate their wealth. Still, even if it's a tenth of what he claimed, it would be substantial. Walter's hand gripped the phone tighter. What would I need to do? Come to our offices. Review the will and the clues. You have 90 days from today before the hidden assets. If they exist, revert to the state. We'll cover your travel expenses, of course. After taking down the details, Walter hung up and sat in stunned silence. It was probably nonsense, a wild goose chase. But what if it wasn't? He found Evelyn had dozed off in the warm library air, her face peaceful in sleep. For a moment, he watched her, remembering the young woman he'd married. She'd been so beautiful, so full of hope. Life had worn them both down, but her spirit remained unbroken. Evie, he said softly, using her old nickname. She woke with a start, immediately alert. What did they say? As he explained, he watched emotions play across her face. Disbelief, hope, fear, and finally, practical determination. It costs us nothing to try, she said simply. The bus fare to Chicago, they'll reimburse it. And even if it's all nonsense, we'll have had an adventure. When's the last time we did something just for the possibility of it? Martin, who'd been politely keeping his distance, approached with a printout. I couldn't help but overhear the firm name. I looked them up. They're legitimate. One of Chicago's oldest estate law firms. Whatever this is, it's not a typical scam. The kindness of near strangers continued to sustain them. Martin helped them navigate the bus website, finding the cheapest fares. Jennifer from the food bank, learning of their trip, assembled a bag of travel snacks. Thomas the mailman made sure they had all the correspondence from the law firm properly organized. 3 days later, wearing their best clothes, which meant their least patched, Walter and Evelyn boarded a Greyhound bus for Chicago. The 6-hour journey was an adventure in itself. They'd rarely left Cedar Falls in recent years, and never together. Watching the landscape change outside the window, Evelyn reached for Walter's hand. "Remember our honeymoon?" she asked. They'd taken a bus then, too, to a cabin by Lake Michigan, spending 3 days pretending the future held only good things. "You wore that yellow dress," Walter recalled. "Said you felt like sunshine. I felt like anything was possible then. Maybe it still is." The law firm's offices occupied 3 floors of a building that spoke of old money and established power. Walter and Evelyn felt acutely out of place in the marble lobby, but the receptionist treated them with surprising warmth. "Mr. and Mrs. Hartwell? Mr. Morrison is expecting you. Please, come this way." James Morrison was younger than his phone, voice suggested, perhaps 40, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. His office was lined with law books and family photos, humanizing the intimidating space. "Thank you for coming," he said, gesturing to comfortable chairs. "Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water?" They accepted water, throats dry from nerves and travel. Morrison pulled out a thick file, handling it with obvious familiarity. "Clarence Mitchell was a fascinating man," he began. "Born into poverty, self-educated, he made his first fortune in the 1,950 seconds through a series of brilliant investments. But he never forgot his roots. He lived in the same modest house for 60 years, drove the same car for 20, wore clothes until they fell apart." "Sounds familiar," Walter muttered. Morrison smiled slightly. "Yes, I imagine it does." He spent years researching his extended family, tracking down distant relatives, learning their stories. He was particularly interested in family members who'd struggled financially despite working hard their entire lives. He pulled out a photograph, old and yellowed. A thin man with sharp eyes stared back at them, unsmiling but not unkind. "This is the only photo we have of him, taken in 1987 at a family reunion he attended incognito. He went by a different name, observed everyone, took notes. Your mother was there, Mr. Hartwell. You were too, apparently, though you wouldn't remember. You were just a child." Walter studied the photo, trying to pull memories from decades past. "I barely remember any family reunions. We were always too poor to host them, too proud to attend many." Mr. Mitchell noticed. He wrote about your family in his journals, how your mother worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table, how she made sure you stayed in school despite pressure to work. He admired that. Morrison pulled out another document, this one more recent. When he knew he was dying, Mr. Mitchell set up an elaborate plan for distributing his wealth. He'd seen how sudden wealth could destroy families, how relatives could turn vultures when money appeared. So he created a test of sorts. What happens next in this story will absolutely stun you. The treasure's location and the family secret it reveals. If you're enjoying the story, please hit that subscribe button and like this video to help more people discover these incredible true stories. "A test?" Evelyn asked. "He hid the bulk of his fortune and left clues only blood relatives could solve. Clues that required understanding family history, recognizing patterns only someone connected to the bloodline would know. He believed that whoever cared enough to search, to piece together the past, would use the wealth wisely." Morrison opened a laptop, turning it toward them. "This is his video will, recorded 2 weeks before his death." The man on the screen looked ancient, oxygen tubes in his nose, but his eyes remained sharp. When he spoke, his voice was surprisingly strong. "If you're watching this, you're my family. Not the family that visited when they wanted something, but the family that never knew I existed, the ones too proud or too far away to beg. I watched you all from a distance. I know your struggles. I know your sacrifices." The video, Clarence looked directly at the camera. "I earn more money than any man needs. Giving it away is easy. Giving it away wisely is hard. So I've made it a challenge. The fortune is real, $100 million in gold coins, cash, and bearer bonds. It's hidden where our family's story began, where struggle met opportunity, where the forgotten remember what the successful forget. He coughed, a painful sound, but continued. The clues are in my journals, 3 of them, hidden in 3 places that mattered to our family. Find the journals, piece together the story, and you'll find the fortune. But move quickly. The government wants its share, and lawyers circle like sharks. You have 90 days from when Morrison contacts you. Good luck. The screen went dark. Walter and Evelyn sat in stunned silence. $100 million? Walter finally whispered. Morrison nodded. We were skeptical too, but we've verified he liquidated that amount from his accounts in the year before his death, converted it to portable assets. The IRS is very interested in finding it, as you can imagine. And no one's found it yet? 17 relatives have tried. Most gave up after a few days. The clues are obtuse. They reference events and places that aren't in any official records. Family stories passed down verbally, the kind of history that dies with each generation. Morrison pulled out 3 sheets of paper. These are the starting clues, 1 for each journal. May I? He read the first aloud. Where tears watered roses and prayers grew corn, where the morning star watched a mother's goodbye, the first truth waits beneath remembered sorrow. The second, in halls where hunger learned its letters, where shame wore shoes held by string, wisdom hides among forgotten lessons. And the third, between salvation's door and temptation's window, where copper became silver through sacrifice, the final piece rests with the grateful dead. Walter and Evelyn exchanged glances. The clues meant nothing to them. Poetry without context. Other relatives had the same reaction, Morrison said gently. But Mr. Mitchell believed someone would understand. He had tremendous faith in family memory. We don't have family memory, Walter said bitterly. My mother never talked about her past. Too painful, she said. Perhaps, Morrison suggested, that's exactly why you might succeed where others failed. Sometimes the silent know more than the speakers. He handed them a card. This has my direct line. The firm has authorized me to provide reasonable assistance, travel funds, research help, whatever you need within limits. Mr. Mitchell wanted his relatives to have every fair chance. Why help us? Evelyn asked. What's in it for the firm? Morrison's smile was rueful. Honestly, closure. This case has consumed our resources for over a year. The publicity hasn't been great. Headlines about hidden millions tend to attract scrutiny. We'd like to see it resolved, the estate properly distributed, and yes, collect our fees from the standard portion of the estate. They left the office with copies of the clues, a check for travel expenses, and heads spinning with possibility. On the street, Chicago's bustle felt surreal after their isolation in Cedar Falls. It's impossible, Walter said. We know nothing about my mother's family. We know she never spoke of them, Evelyn countered. That's information too. Silence tells its own story. They found a cheap motel near the bus station, paying with part of the expense money. That night, sitting on one of 2 narrow beds, they spread the clues out and stared at them as if intensity alone could decode their meaning. Where tears watered roses, Evelyn read aloud. Your mother did love roses. Remember that bush she tended behind the shack? Every old woman loves roses. That's hardly a unique clue. But she cried when she tended them. You told me that. Said it was the allergies, but you knew better. Walter considered this. His mother had been a mystery wrapped in sadness, revealing nothing of her childhood beyond the fact of orphanhood. But there had been moments, glimpses of a past she couldn't entirely suppress. She used to sing, he remembered suddenly, just one song over and over. Something about morning stars and farewells. Evelyn grabbed the first clue. Where the morning star watched a mother's goodbye. Walter, that's not random. That's specific. They talked through the night, mining Walter's memories for fragments. His mother had been raised by relatives, passed from family to family like an obligation. She'd mentioned Iowa once, or was it Illinois? Somewhere with cornfields stretching to the horizon. Wait, Walter said suddenly. The cemetery. When she was dying, she made me promise to bury her in Cedar Falls instead of sending her body home. She said she'd rather rest with strangers than return to that place. What place? She never said, but it scared her. Even decades later, Evelyn pulled out the motel's battered phone book, looking for cemetery records, genealogical societies, anywhere that might hold traces of family history. We'll start with birth records. Your mother's maiden name was Mitchell, same as Clarence. They were cousins, so there must be common ancestors. The next days blurred together in a haze of research. The Chicago Public Library became their base of operations, librarians helping them navigate databases and dusty archives. Slowly, patterns emerged. The Mitchell family had scattered from a small Iowa town called Perdition, a place so small it no longer appeared on modern maps. The town had failed during the Depression, its population fleeing to cities or anywhere that offered work. Perdition, Evelyn said. Your mother fled a town called Perdition. No wonder she never spoke of it. They found records of the town cemetery, still maintained by the State Historical Society. Among the graves, a cluster of Mitchells, who died within months of each other in 1932. Spanish flu, the records indicated, though the dates seemed wrong for that pandemic, or something the family called Spanish flu to avoid shame, Evelyn suggested. People rebadged all sorts of tragedies back then. A genealogical website provided by the library yielded more clues. Walter's grandmother, Sarah Mitchell, had been 16 when she died, leaving behind 3 children under the age of 5. The children had been separated, sent to different relatives, their paths diverging like seeds scattered by wind. Your mother was the youngest. Evelyn traced the family tree with one finger. 2 years old when orphaned. No wonder she didn't remember. But Clarence was older. His mother was Sarah's sister. He would have heard stories. They decided to visit Perdition, using more of Morrison's expense funds for bus fare and a rental car for the final miles. The journey took them through landscapes that grew increasingly desolate, towns surrendering to farmland, then farmland surrendering to abandonment. Perdition existed more as memory than place. A few foundations marked where buildings once stood. The cemetery, promised by online records, sat on a hill overlooking what had been Main Street. Winter dead grass obscured most graves, but the Mitchell section was marked by a large stone, newer than the rest. Clarence, Evelyn read from the stone. He had this placed recently. Look at the date. The memorial listed all the Mitchells who died in 1932, including Sarah. But at the bottom, an inscription in smaller letters. Where tears, water, roses, love plants, truth. Walter knelt despite his protesting knees, brushing away dead grass at the base of the memorial. The ground felt different there, softer. Using a stick, he probed the earth until it hit something solid. There's something here. They dug with their hands and the stick, Walter's pocket knife proving marginally useful. 6 inches down, they found a metal box wrapped in plastic. Inside, the first journal waited, leather-bound and filled with Clarence Mitchell's cramped handwriting. The journal told the real story of 1,932, not Spanish flu but starvation. The Mitchell family had been sharecroppers, working land they'd never owned. When drought killed the crops and the landowner demanded his share anyway, they'd had nothing left to eat. The children survived on grass soup and hope. The adults didn't survive at all. My God, Evelyn whispered. They starved to death rather than abandon their children. Clarence had learned this story from his mother, one of the few adult Mitchells who'd been working elsewhere that terrible year. The guilt had destroyed her, knowing her sister died while she lived, separated by just 50 miles, but impossibly far in those days. The journal contained more than family tragedy. Clarence had tucked photographs between pages, unnamed faces at gatherings, buildings long demolished, and maps of places that no longer existed. And near the end, the second clue expanded. The halls where hunger learned its letters were in Chicago. The settlement house on Maxwell Street, where immigrant children and rural refugees came together, where my cousins learned English and forgot their shame, where young Hazel Mitchell became just Hazel, erasing a past too heavy for child shoulders. Hazel was my mother's name, Walter breathed. They returned to Chicago with the first journal. energized by success but sobered by the story it contained. The Maxwell Street Settlement House had been demolished in the 1,960 seconds, but the Chicago History Museum held archives from that era. We're looking for attendance records from 1,933 to 1,935, Evelyn explained to the archivist. The Mitchell children would have been students there. The archivist, intrigued by their quest, helped them locate boxes of yellow documents. Among class lists and charity records, they found Hazel Mitchell's name, age 7, arrived February 1933, sponsored by the Children's Aid Society. She was here 2 years, the archivist noted. Then the trail ends, probably placed with the family. But Walter recognized something in the attendance sheets. His mother had drawn tiny stars next to her name each time she signed in, a habit she'd maintained throughout life, starring important documents as if marking them for cosmic attention. She was here. This was her. They searched the archive boxes for anything else from that period. In a folder of children's compositions, they found it, an essay by Hazel Mitchell, age 8, titled, "What I Want to Be." Walter read his mother's childhood words aloud. "I want to be invisible. I want to forget the hungry time. I want a new name and a new family who doesn't know about the roses that grow on graves. I want to be someone else." Evelyn wiped tears from her eyes. She got her wish. She became someone else so thoroughly she couldn't find her way back. But Clarence had found her, tracked her through records and determination. His journal revealed he'd watched her from a distance, respecting her desire for anonymity while ensuring she never faced starvation again. Anonymous gifts, unexpected windfalls, opportunities that seemed like luck but were carefully orchestrated charity. He was her guardian angel, Evelyn said. And she never knew. The second clue's location revealed itself through building permits attached to the archive documents. The settlement house had possessed a peculiar architectural feature, a hidden room between the main hall and the kitchen used to store food donations. Social workers had called it the wisdom room because children did their best learning when hunger was held at bay. "But the building's gone," Walter said, frustrated. The archivist overheard and smiled. "The building's gone, but not everything in it. When they demolished Maxwell Street, the Historical Society salvaged architectural elements. They're in our warehouse. No one ever looks at them, but they're cataloged." The warehouse visit required special permission, Morrison's law firm connections proving useful again. Among salvaged doors and windows, they found a section labeled Maxwell Street Settlement House. And there, wrapped in protective plastic, sat what had once been the wisdom room's doorframe. Why save a doorframe? Walter wondered. "Check the corners," Evelyn suggested, remembering how Clarence had hidden the first journal. The frame was solid oak, ornately carved with immigrant symbols, ships, stars, hands reaching skyward. But one carved rose looked different from the others, its center protruding slightly. Walter pressed it, and a hidden panel popped open. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was the second journal. This one was different, less family history and more personal reflection. Clarence wrote about wealth's burden, how making money had been easy, but making meaning from it proved impossible. He'd watched relatives who knew of his fortune circle like vultures. He'd tested charities that promised impact but delivered administrative overhead. He'd grown bitter, then sad, then determined. "I will not let my money destroy what poverty couldn't kill," he wrote. "The family spirit that survives starvation, abandonment, and shame. Those who understand that spirit will understand my final message." The expanded third clue was more complex. Between salvation's door and temptation's window sits St. Bartholomew's last stand, where copper became silver, not through alchemy, but through algebra, where grateful death wore a copper-colored rose. "St. Bartholomew's," Walter said. "That's a church, but which one?" They returned to the library, researching churches named for St. Bartholomew in areas where the Mitchell family had lived. There were dozens, but cross-referencing with Clarence's journals narrowed it down. He'd written about visiting a church where his aunt had worked, cleaning for pennies that she'd somehow stretched to feed 5 children. "Cedar Falls," Evelyn said suddenly. "St. Bartholomew's in Cedar Falls. It closed 20 years ago, but the building's still there." Walter's heart sank. They'd traveled hundreds of miles seeking Clarence's fortune, only to have the trail lead home. But perhaps that was the point. Perhaps Clarence understood that sometimes you had to leave to appreciate what you'd fled. They took the bus back to Cedar Falls, watching familiar landmarks appear with new eyes. The town looked even more depressed after Chicago's energy, but also more comprehensible. This was where Walter's mother had finally stopped running, where she'd married a kind man who asked no questions about her past, where she'd raised Walter with fierce love and protective silence. St. Bartholomew's stood on the east side, its once grand Gothic architecture now crumbling. Plywood-covered stained glass windows, graffiti-decorated walls that had once inspired prayer, but the building remained structurally sound, too expensive to demolish, too neglected to restore. "Salvation's door," Walter said, trying the main entrance. Locked, but the wood was rotten enough that his shoulder could force it open. Inside, darkness and decay reigned. Pews had been removed, sold to antique dealers. The altar was bare, but high above, where vandals couldn't reach, stained glass windows remained intact. Afternoon light filtered through, casting colored shadows across empty space. "Temptation's window," Evelyn pointed to a particular window depicting St. Bartholomew's martyrdom. Between that and the door, they searched the floor, walls, anywhere something could be hidden. Years of debris made progress slow. Walter's hips screamed protests. Evelyn's arthritis turned her fingers into claws of pain. But they persisted. "Here," Evelyn called from near a pillar. "The floor's different here." Where carpet had once lain, wooden planks showed wear patterns suggesting heavy foot traffic. But one section near the pillar looked newer, the wood less weathered. Walter used his knife to pry at the edges until a board lifted, revealing a metal box beneath. This box was larger than the others, heavier. Inside, along with the third journal, were bundles of cash, gold coins in protective cases, and bearer bonds that made Walter's hands shake. This is millions, right here, just part of it," Evelyn corrected, reading from the journal. "He scattered it. Look." Clarence's final journal was a treasure map of sorts, but not to one location. He'd hidden portions of his fortune in places throughout Cedar Falls, each connected to his family's history. The church was just the beginning. "The Copper Rose," Walter read. "He means the cemetery. My mother's grave." They sat in the empty church, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they'd discovered. Not just wealth, but a story of family perseverance, of connections maintained across distance and silence, of love expressed through anonymous care. "We should call Morrison," Evelyn said practically. "In a moment," Walter replied. "First, let's visit Mom." Cedar Falls Cemetery spread across a hill overlooking the town. Walter's mother lay in a modest plot he'd scrimped to purchase, her stone bearing only her name and dates. But someone had been there recently. Fresh roses, copper-colored in the afternoon light, decorated the grave. Clarence, Walter realized. He visited her. Near the base of the stone, barely visible beneath grass, was a small metal marker. Walter had never noticed it before, assumed it was a cemetery survey mark. But now he saw the tiny rose etched in its center. "Should we?" Evelyn asked. "She'd want us to," Walter replied. Certain beyond evidence, the marker lifted with effort, revealing not another box, but a key. Modern, electronic, the kind used for safety deposit boxes. Numbers etched on its side, presumably indicated bank and box information. The real treasure, Evelyn guessed. They called Morrison from the library, Walter's hands trembling as he dialed. The lawyer's relief was audible through the phone. "Thank God. Do you have all 3 journals?" "Yes." "Excellent. And you found additional materials?" "We found enough to know this is real." "What happens now?" "Secure everything immediately. I'll fly out tomorrow with a team. We'll need to document everything, verify the bonds, count the cash. The IRS will want their portion, but even after taxes, Mr. Hartwell, you're going to be very wealthy." That night, they slept in their shack for what they knew would be the last time. The money hidden in the church was secured in a bank vault, the journals locked in Morrison's hotel safe. Tomorrow would bring lawyers, accountants, and decisions they'd never imagined making. "Are you scared?" Evelyn asked in the darkness. "Terrified," Walter admitted. "What do we even do with that much money?" "Whatever we want. But first, I think we fix the roof." They laughed. The sound strange in a space that had heard mostly sighs and worries. But already, Walter's mind was working. Medical care for Evelyn's arthritis. Repairs to make the shack livable while they decided on something more permanent. A car to restore their mobility. Small things that would have been miracles just days ago. "We should find the children," Evelyn said quietly. Walter tensed. "They abandoned us. They abandoned poverty. Maybe they'll find room for wealthy parents. I don't want to buy their love." "Neither do I. But maybe we can buy their attention long enough to show them we're still the same people who sacrificed everything for their success." Walter considered this. The money would change everything, but it couldn't change the past. Their children had revealed their character through absence, but perhaps they deserved a second chance, just as Walter and Evelyn had received one through Clarence's elaborate gift. Morrison arrived the next morning with 2 associates and a security consultant. They spent the day documenting the treasures, each discovery more astounding than the last. The safety deposit box, located in a Chicago bank, contained the bulk of the fortune: bearer bonds, gold certificates, and investment documents worth over $90 million. "Mr. Mitchell was very clever," Morrison explained. "These assets are structured to minimize tax impact. You'll still owe significant amounts, but far less than if he'd simply left cash." The process took weeks. Lawyers verified documents. Accountants calculated obligations. Security experts advised on protecting newfound wealth. Walter and Evelyn, meanwhile, remained in their shack, slowly adjusting to the reality of their situation. The first changes were small but significant. Evelyn saw a rheumatologist who prescribed treatments they could now afford. Walter had his hip properly evaluated, scheduling replacement surgery that would restore his mobility. They bought a modest car, nothing flashy, but reliable and comfortable. The news eventually leaked, as news always does in small towns. Suddenly, Walter and Evelyn Hartwell were celebrities in Cedar Falls. Neighbors who'd ignored them for years appeared with congratulations and thinly veiled requests. Charities called constantly. Investment advisors competed for their attention, but the most significant calls came from their children. Marcus was first, his voice carefully modulated as if addressing a patient. "Dad, I heard, that is, someone told me about your situation. Your windfall. I wanted to congratulate you." "Thank you," Walter replied, offering nothing more. "I was thinking, it's been too long since we visited. Maybe Stephanie and I could come out next month? The kids would love to see you." "The kids don't know us, Marcus. You made sure of that." Silence stretched before Marcus tried again. "I know we've been distant. My work, the demands of the practice, but family is important. We should reconnect. We've been in the same shack for 43 years. You knew where to find us when we were poor. Why is it important now?" The conversation ended awkwardly, Marcus mumbling about checking his schedule and calling back. He didn't. Diana's approach was more subtle. She sent flowers, expensive ones, with a card expressing regret for the distance between them. She followed up with a letter, handwritten on stationery that probably cost more than Walter and Evelyn's former weekly food budget. "I've been reflecting on family lately," she wrote. "Perhaps it's age, but I realize I've prioritized the wrong things. Would you consider visiting? We have plenty of room, and Connecticut is lovely in the spring." Robert didn't bother with subtlety. His letter came from his law firm, offering to help manage their newfound wealth. "You need sophisticated legal guidance?" he wrote. "People will try to take advantage of you. Let me protect you." Sarah remained silent, either unaware of the news or too proud to reverse her complete abandonment. Walter found he respected that more than his other children's sudden interest. "What do we do about them?" Evelyn asked after reading Robert's letter aloud. "Nothing yet," Walter decided. "Let's see who we want to be before we decide who we want in our lives." They hired a financial advisor, someone Morrison recommended, who specialized in sudden wealth syndrome. She helped them understand their options, invest conservatively, and create a spending plan that felt comfortable rather than overwhelming. The shack, symbol of their poverty, became the first major decision. Demolish and rebuild? Renovate? Move elsewhere? I want to stay in Cedar Falls, Evelyn said. This is home. But not in the shack. We've earned better. They bought a modest house in a quiet neighborhood. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, a kitchen with appliances that worked, windows that sealed properly. After the shack, it felt like a palace, but they kept the purchase quiet, moving in without fanfare. The shack itself they donated to a nonprofit that retrofitted abandoned buildings for homeless veterans. Walter insisted on funding the renovation, transforming the place that had sheltered them into shelter for others. Charity became their primary occupation. They established a foundation, naming it after Hazel Mitchell to honor Walter's mother and all the silent sacrifices of forgotten parents. The foundation funded food banks, paid heating bills for elderly residents, and provided scholarships for first-generation college students. We're giving away Clarence's money, Walter said one evening, reviewing grant applications. We're investing it, Evelyn corrected. In people like us, like we were. That's what he wanted. 6 months after finding the treasure, they received an unexpected visitor. Thomas, the mail carrier, delivered a registered letter requiring signature, but he lingered after Walter signed, clearly wanting to say something. Mr. Hartwell, I hope you don't think I'm overstepping, but I wanted to thank you. For what? The foundation paid my mother's heating bill last month. She was too proud to apply, but somehow you knew she needed help. She's been warm for the first time in years. That means everything. After Thomas left, Walter found Evelyn crying in the kitchen. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Everything's right. We're doing what our children should have done. We're taking care of people. The children continued their campaigns with varying persistence. Marcus hired a private investigator to compile a complete picture of their parents' wealth. Diana sent increasingly emotional letters. Robert had his secretary call weekly to schedule meetings that Walter never accepted. Finally, Walter decided to test them. He sent identical letters to all 4 children. We're hosting Thanksgiving dinner at our new home. You're welcome to attend. But there are conditions. No discussion of money. No bringing lawyers or financial advisors. No gifts except your presence. If you come, come as family, not beneficiaries. Love, Mom and Dad. Only Sarah didn't respond. Marcus, Diana, and Robert all confirmed attendance, agreeing to the conditions with an eagerness that felt hollow. Thanksgiving arrived gray and cold. Evelyn had spent days cooking, recreating the meals she'd once made from scraps and love. The house smelled of turkey and pie, comfort and memory. Marcus arrived first, his family in tow. Stephanie, his wife, looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. Their children, teenagers now, stared at their phones with practiced disinterest. Marcus himself seemed smaller than Walter remembered, success having somehow diminished rather than enlarged him. Diana came alone, her husband claiming a work emergency. She brought wine despite the no-gifts rule, explaining it away as contributing to dinner. Her nervous chatter filled spaces where warmth should have lived. Robert arrived last, having driven his newest Mercedes slowly past the modest house twice before parking. He came alone, his latest divorce having finalized recently. The meal was awkward, conversation stilted. The children spoke of their lives in broad strokes, avoiding the years of absence. The grandchildren picked at their food, clearly uncomfortable in this strange house with these unfamiliar grandparents. Finally, Walter had enough. "Why are you here?" he asked, setting down his fork. "Because you invited us," Diana said carefully. "I invited family. You're strangers who share my DNA." "That's not fair," Marcus protested. "We're trying to what? To pretend the last decade didn't happen? To act like you didn't abandon us when we had nothing to offer?" Silence fell heavy as gravy. One of Marcus's teenagers looked up from their phone, suddenly interested. "You want to know what your mother and I learned from Clarence Mitchell's treasure?" Walter continued. "We learned that money reveals character. It doesn't create it. You showed us your character when we were poor. Now you want us to forget that because we're rich." "People make mistakes," Robert said, his lawyer voice emerging. "Families reconcile." "Do they?" Evelyn spoke for the first time since dinner began. "Tell me, Robert, what's my favorite color?" "Diana, What book did I read to you every night when you were small? Marcus, what song did I sing when you had nightmares? The silence stretched. None of them knew. They'd been absent too long, their childhood memories overwritten by years of deliberate distance. Blue? Evelyn said softly. My favorite color is blue, like the dress I wore when your father proposed. The Velveteen Rabbit, Diana. You loved how the toy became real through being loved. And Marcus, I sang You Were My Sunshine until you told me you were too old for lullabies. Mom, Diana started, tears in her voice. I'm not your mom anymore. I'm the woman you left in a shack because I embarrassed you. Your father and I could have died in that place, and you wouldn't have known for months, maybe years. We're sorry, Marcus said. We're so sorry. Are you sorry, or are you poor? Walter asked. Because we could test that. We could give away every penny tomorrow. Would you still be here on Christmas? Would you visit next year? Or would you disappear again until the next windfall? The question hung unanswered because everyone knew the truth. The money had drawn them like moths to flame. Without it, they'd drift away again, their shame now compounded by greed. One of the teenagers, Marcus's daughter Alexis, suddenly spoke. I don't even know you. They never talked about you. I thought you were dead until last year. The honesty of youth cut through adult pretense. Walter looked at his granddaughter, seeing Evelyn's eyes in a stranger's face. We're not dead, he said gently. We're just strangers your parents chose to forget. The dinner ended soon after. The children left with mumbled excuses and promises to keep in touch that everyone knew were empty. Walter and Evelyn cleaned up in companionable silence, washing dishes that had held so much hope and disappointment. Well, Evelyn said finally, at least we know. We always knew. Money just confirmed it. They continued their charitable work with renewed purpose. The foundation grew, helping hundreds of families struggling as they once had. Walter served on the board of the food bank that had sustained them. Evelyn volunteered at the library that had provided warmth and dignity during their poorest days. One spring day, almost 2 years after finding the treasure, they received a letter addressed in unfamiliar handwriting. Inside, a single paragraph. I work at the grocery store where you used to count pennies to buy expired bread. I watched you share that bread with your dog, making sure he ate even when you couldn't afford to. Now I see you driving past in your nice car, and I wonder if you remember being hungry. Then I get a letter saying the foundation you started is paying for my daughter's college. You remember? Thank you for remembering. Maria. Walter read it aloud 3 times, his voice breaking on the final reading. This is why Clarence chose us, Evelyn said. Not because we were perfect, but because we'd remember. They framed Maria's letter, hanging it in their home office where they reviewed grant applications. It reminded them daily why Clarence Mitchell had hidden his fortune rather than simply bequeathing it. The search had been the test, but the real challenge was what came after. On the 3rd anniversary of finding the treasure, they visited Clarence's grave in Chicago. Morrison had arranged for a proper headstone, but Walter and Evelyn brought their own tribute, a photo album documenting everyone the foundation had helped. We found your treasure, Walter said to the stone. All of it, not just the money, but the reason you hid it. They laid copper roses on the grave, the same variety that grew on his family's plot in Perdition. The flowers would wilt, but what they represented, family, sacrifice, remembrance, would endure. As they prepared to leave the cemetery, Evelyn noticed a young couple at a nearby grave. The woman was crying, the man holding her with the desperate strength of someone trying to prevent complete collapse. Their clothes were clean but worn. Their car, visible in the parking lot, was held together with hope and duct tape. Walter and Evelyn exchanged glances, then approached carefully. I'm sorry for your loss, Evelyn said gently. The woman looked up, eyes red with grief. My mother, she raised me alone, worked 3 jobs, never complained. And I was starting to make something of myself. Got promoted last month. I was going to surprise her, tell her she could finally retire. But she knew, Walter said with certainty. Parents always know. She was proud of you. They talked for a few minutes, learning the young couple's story. Recent college graduates, drowning in student loans, now facing funeral expenses they couldn't afford. The woman, Lisa, had been the first in her family to graduate college. Her mother had lived just long enough to see it. As they parted, Walter pressed something into Lisa's hand. "For the funeral expenses," he said, walking away before she could protest. It wasn't until they were gone that Lisa looked at what he'd given her. A check for $50,000. Memo line reading, "From one daughter to another. Your mother's sacrifice continues." "You can't help everyone," Evelyn said as they drove home. "No," Walter agreed. "But we can help someone. Clarence helped us. We help others. Maybe they'll help someone else. That's how it's supposed to work." Their children continued to orbit at a distance, sending holiday cards and making occasional calls that danced around the subject of inheritance. Walter and Evelyn had their lawyer make their intentions clear. The bulk of their estate would go to the foundation. The children would receive enough to know they weren't entirely forgotten, but not enough to make them wealthy. "Let them earn their own success," Walter said, "like we earned our second chance." The shack still stood, transformed now into transitional housing. Sometimes Walter drove past, remembering winter nights when wind whistled through cracks and rain drummed on buckets. The memory wasn't bitter anymore, just part of their story. One autumn evening, as they sat on their porch watching leaves spiral down, a car pulled up. A woman emerged, well-dressed but hesitant. She looked familiar in the way distant relatives do, sharing angles and expressions. "Mr. Hartwell? I'm Patricia Caldwell. Clarence Mitchell was my great-uncle." They invited her in, serving coffee in the living room that still felt too nice for daily use. Patricia was a teacher from Minnesota, had learned about their discovery through Morrison's firm. "I'm not here for money," she said quickly. "I know Uncle Clarence left things as he wanted. I wanted to meet you, to understand why he chose you." They talked through the evening, sharing stories of Clarence, of family scattered and reconnected. Patricia had brought photo albums, pictures of Mitchell descendants living ordinary lives across the country. "He studied all of us," she said, "kept files on everyone, but you two fascinated him most. He said you lived with dignity despite everything, that you never turned bitter." "We had our bitter moments," Evelyn admitted, "but you didn't let them define you. That's what he valued." Before leaving, Patricia asked if she could visit again, maybe bring her children to meet them. They agreed readily, recognizing the difference between family seeking connection and relatives seeking profit. As winter approached, Walter's health began declining. The heart medication controlled his condition, but decades of hard living had taken their toll. He faced it without fear, having accomplished more in his final years than he'd dreamed possible. "No hospitals," he told Evelyn. "When it's time, I want to be home." She understood. They'd watched too many friends disappear into medical machinery, their final days consumed by tests and procedures that prolonged life without preserving its quality. But Walter had years left, just slower ones. They adjusted their pace, delegating more foundation work to younger board members while maintaining oversight. The work continued, rippling outward in ways they'd never fully know. One snowy morning, echoing that first breakfast in their freezing shack, they sat in their warm kitchen, watching birds at the feeder Evelyn maintained. "Do you ever regret not keeping more?" she asked. "We could have lived like our children do. Luxury cars, vacation homes, first-class everything." Walter reached across the table, taking her hand the way he had for over 50 years. "We have everything we need. Heat, food, dignity, and purpose. What else is there?" "Time," Evelyn said softly. "I wish we'd found the treasure sooner. Then we might have become different people. Clarence knew what he was doing. He gave us wealth when we were too old to be corrupted by it, too tired to waste it on foolishness, wise enough to see its true purpose." A knock at the door interrupted them. Thomas, the mail carrier, stood on the porch, but not with mail. He held a basket of homemade preserves, his mother beside him. "Mom wanted to thank you personally," he explained. The elderly woman, Rosa, stepped forward shyly. "The foundation helped me stay in my home. My children wanted to thank the people who made that possible." They invited them in, serving coffee and cookies. Rosa's story emerged. Widowed, living on Social Security, facing property tax increases that would have forced her to sell. The foundation had paid the taxes and helped her apply for senior exemptions she hadn't known existed. "My house has been in our family for 60 years, Rosa explained. "My husband built it board by board. Losing it would have killed me faster than age." Walter understood. Home was more than shelter. It was continuity, memory, identity. They'd nearly lost all three in their shack, saved only by their bond to each other. After Thomas and Rosa left, other visitors arrived. Word had spread that the reclusive benefactors were receiving guests. Throughout the day, people came to say thank you. A young man whose insulin the foundation subsidized. A family whose heat had stayed on through brutal winter thanks to emergency assistance. An elderly couple who'd received car repairs that let them reach doctor's appointments. "It's like George Bailey," Evelyn whispered to Walter between visitors. "All these lives we've touched. Except we're not jumping off any bridges," Walter replied. That night, exhausted but fulfilled, they realized they'd built something larger than wealth. They'd created a network of mutual support, the kind of community that notices when someone's struggling and responds without judgment. "This is what our children missed," Evelyn said. "They accumulated wealth but not connection, success but not significance." Walter nodded, too tired for words but understanding completely. They'd been given a second chance, not just at comfort, but at meaning. Clarence Mitchell's treasure had been perfectly designed, enough to transform lives, hidden in a way that revealed character, distributed by those who understood its weight. As their 5th year of wealth began, changes accelerated. Walter needed a wheelchair for longer distances. Evelyn's memory showed occasional gaps, but they faced these challenges differently than they would have in the shack. Good medical care, comfortable surroundings, and most importantly, purpose that extended beyond survival. They hired assistants, not servants, but partners in their charitable work. Young people recommended by the foundation's beneficiaries, eager to learn about thoughtful giving. The work would continue beyond them, seeds planted with Clarence's treasure growing into forests of possibility. One assistant, Jerome, had been homeless before the foundation helped him find housing and job training. Now he managed their calendar and correspondence with quiet efficiency. "Why do you do it?" he asked one day. "Give so much away?" "Because keeping it would have made us smaller," Walter explained. "Giving it away makes us larger than ourselves." Jerome understood. He'd seen how sudden windfalls destroyed people unprepared for wealth. But Walter and Evelyn had been prepared by poverty, shaped by sacrifice, refined by abandonment. They couldn't be corrupted by money because they'd already been tested by its absence. That spring brought unexpected joy. Patricia Caldwell visited again, this time with her teenage daughters. The girls were curious about their family history, eager to understand roots their great-great-uncle Clarence had documented so carefully. He wrote that our family was like dandelions, one girl read from Clarence's journal, scattered by wind, growing in cracks, surviving where roses couldn't, weeds to some, but flowers to those who see truly. "Your uncle was a poet," Evelyn said. "He was a survivor who made sure other survivors could bloom," Patricia corrected. They spent the day sharing stories, looking through photos, connecting faces to names in Clarence's genealogies. The Mitchell family, fractured by poverty and pride, was slowly reconnecting through his final gift. "Would you like to see where we lived before?" Walter offered impulsively. They drove to the old neighborhood, now revitalized by community development. The shack had been transformed into a neat cottage, smoke rising from its chimney. A veteran's family lived there now, rebuilding lives after their own trials. "We don't need to go in," Walter said. "Just wanted you to see where your uncle's treasure landed us. In that shack, counting pennies, sharing bread with our dog, never imagining." "That's why he chose you," Patricia's eldest daughter said with teenage certainty. "Because you couldn't imagine it. People who can imagine wealth usually imagine it wrong." From the mouths of babes, Evelyn thought, echoing biblical wisdom. The child saw what adults complicated. Transformation required innocence, not ambition. As summer deepened, Walter's health declined more rapidly. He faced it with the same practical grace that had carried them through poverty. No denial, no bargaining, just preparation for another transition. "I want to see Robert," he told Evelyn one evening. "Why?" "He's been the worst of them." "Exactly why. I won't leave this world with that between us." Robert came within days of the call, flying in from Chicago where he was defending a corporation against fraud charges. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Father and son sat in the garden Evelyn had cultivated, beauty grown from soil that had never known flowers. Robert looked older, success having carved harsh lines in his face. "I'm dying," Walter said simply. "Months, not years. I wanted to clear the air." Robert shifted uncomfortably. "Dad, let me finish. I failed you somewhere. A parent who raises a child who can abandon them has failed. I don't know where or how, but I'm sorry for my part." "You didn't fail." Robert's voice broke. "I failed. I let ambition eat my soul. Told myself I was building something for the future while destroying the past that made me." They talked for hours, excavating buried feelings. Robert revealed his own struggles. 2 divorces, children who barely knew him, wealth that felt hollow. He'd achieved everything he'd thought he wanted and found it wasn't what he needed. "Can you forgive me?" Robert asked finally. "I forgave you years ago," Walter said. "The question is whether you can forgive yourself." When Robert left, there was no talk of inheritance or future benefit, but he left lighter, some burden lifted by honest conversation. He would return monthly until the end, not as a son expecting wealth, but as a man remembering his father. The others came too, drawn by Walter's decline. Diana brought her children, teenagers who discovered grandparents were people with stories, not just sources of gifts. Marcus came alone, his marriage having crumbled under the weight of unexamined priorities. Even Sarah appeared, weathered by her own choices, asking for nothing but conversation. "We could have had this all along," Evelyn observed after a particularly good visit. "Connection without the money." "Maybe," Walter conceded. "But would they have come without it? Did the treasure bring them back? Or did it reveal what was always broken?" There was no answer, only the complicated truth of families divided by more than distance. As autumn arrived, Walter spent most days in bed, windows open to catch the seasonal air. The foundation ran smoothly without his daily input, structures in place to continue the mission. He'd built well. This second life constructed from unexpected fortune. Morrison visited, bringing final paperwork to ensure Evelyn would face no legal challenges. The estate was clearly structured, the foundation protected, individual bequests modest but meaningful. "Clarence would be proud," Morrison said. "You found not just his treasure, but his purpose." "We found ourselves," Walter corrected. "The treasure just paid for the journey." His last coherent days were spent making recordings for the foundation, wisdom earned through poverty and wealth, simple principles. Dignity matters more than dollars, connection more than cash, purpose more than profit. The recordings would guide future decisions when he and Evelyn were gone. Thomas the mail carrier visited, bringing not mail but memories. "You know what I remember most? How you always had a kind word, even when you were counting pennies for stamps. That hasn't changed." Others came, librarians who'd offered them refuge, food bank volunteers who'd preserved their dignity, neighbors who'd pretended not to notice when they'd scavenged cans for deposits. The network of humanity that sustains the forgotten. We were never truly alone, Walter realized aloud. Even at our poorest, people cared. We just couldn't see it through our shame. On a crisp October morning, with Evelyn beside him, an autumn light painting the walls gold, Walter passed peacefully. His last words were for her alone, whispered promises about waiting on the other side, wherever that might be. The funeral drew hundreds, not dignitaries or wealthy donors, but regular people whose lives had been touched by the foundation. They filled the church where Walter and Evelyn had married decades ago, when poverty was their only certainty. The children sat in the front row, no longer estranged but not quite reconciled. Grief and guilt warred in their faces as speaker after speaker testified to their father's impact. They heard stories they'd never known. Walter teaching carpentry to at-risk youth, fixing homes for elderly neighbors, creating beauty from scraps and determination. "I didn't know him," Diana whispered to Marcus. "I knew the father who raised me, but not the man he became." "We left too soon," Marcus replied. "Missed the best part." Evelyn spoke last, her voice steady despite tears. "Walter used to say we were dandelions, growing in cracks, thriving where others couldn't. But dandelions do more than survive. They feed bees, make wishes, spread seeds on every wind. That's Walter's legacy, seeds scattered everywhere, growing into gardens we'll never fully see." After the service, as people shared food and memories in the church hall, a young woman approached Evelyn. She carried a baby, her clothes neat but clearly secondhand. "Mrs. Hartwell, I'm Amy Chen. 3 years ago, I was sleeping in my car, pregnant, abandoned by everyone. The foundation helped me find housing, finish my degree, start over. My daughter's middle name is Hope, after what you gave me." Evelyn held the baby, feeling the weight of future possibility in her arms. This child would grow up housed, educated, loved, because Clarence Mitchell had hidden treasure for patient seekers to find. "What will you do now?" Patricia Caldwell asked later, helping Evelyn sort through sympathy cards. "Continue," Evelyn said simply. "The work doesn't end because Walter did. If anything, I need to work harder to honor both him and Clarence. But grief has its own timeline. The house felt enormous without Walter's presence. His chair, his tools, his reading glasses, objects infused with absence." Evelyn found herself talking to him, updating him on foundation business, sharing neighborhood gossip, maintaining connection beyond death's interruption. The children visited more frequently, especially Robert. He'd taken leave from his practice, claiming he needed to help settle the estate. But Evelyn recognized deeper motivation, late-blooming filial duty mixed with genuine grief. "I wasted so much time," he said one evening, helping her sort through Walter's papers, "chasing success while missing significance. Your father forgave you. Perhaps it's time to forgive yourself. How do you forgive abandoning your parents in a shack? How do you reconcile that with any concept of decency?" "By doing better," Evelyn said. "By learning from failure. By honoring what you missed through how you live now." Robert stayed 6 months, helping with the foundation, reconnecting with his mother, discovering the man his father had become. When he finally returned to Chicago, he was different, quieter, more thoughtful, less driven by external validation. Diana and Marcus visited monthly, bringing their children. The teenagers, initially reluctant, discovered a grandmother worth knowing. Sarah remained more distant, but maintained contact progress from complete abandonment. The first anniversary of Walter's death arrived with unexpected peace. Evelyn visited his grave, bringing copper roses like those Clarence had favored. The cemetery was quiet, autumn air crisp with possibility. "We did it," she told the stone. "Found the treasure, shared it wisely, rebuilt our family partially. Not perfectly, but genuinely. You'd be proud." A wind stirred the roses, and Evelyn chose to read it as agreement. Walter had believed in signs, patterns, connections, invisible but real. She'd learned to see them too, how generosity circled back, how kindness compounded, how love persisted beyond logical boundaries. Back home, she found Jerome organizing foundation files with characteristic precision. They'd received more applications than ever, need always exceeding resources, but they'd also received more donations, people helped by the foundation, paying it forward as they were able. "It's becoming self-sustaining," Jerome observed. Mr. Hartwell's vision of circular generosity. That evening, reviewing applications, Evelyn noticed a familiar name, Lisa Chen, the woman they'd helped at her mother's funeral years ago. She wasn't applying for help, but offering it volunteering professional skills. As her business had grown successful, the circle widened, ripples from Clarence Mitchell's splash spreading across generations. Each person helped became potential help for others. The treasure, finite in dollars, proved infinite in impact. As Evelyn aged, she delegated more but remained engaged. The foundation board expanded, including beneficiaries who understood its mission viscerally. Her children, transformed by Walter's death and her continued example, became active participants rather than distant heirs. "We should have been here all along," Diana said at one board meeting. "Should have seen what you were building instead of fleeing what we came from." "You're here now," Evelyn replied. That's what matters. She lived to 91, lucid until the end, surrounded by chosen and biological family. The funeral drew even more than Walter's generations of people whose lives had been altered by Clarence's treasure and their stewardship of it. Marcus spoke at the service. Finally, the son they'd raised him to be. My parents died wealthy, but they lived rich. Rich in purpose, connection, impact. They found a treasure and became one. The foundation continued, run now by people who understood poverty's weight and wealth's responsibility. The Hartwell home, as the renovated shack was now known, sheltered dozens of families transitioning from crisis to stability. In the foundation office, 2 portraits hung side by side, Walter and Evelyn Hartwell and Clarence Mitchell. Below them, a plaque with Clarence's words, "Where tears water roses and prayers grow corn, truth waits beneath remembered sorrow." Thousands had reason to remember, not with sorrow but gratitude. A treasure hidden in shame and silence had become a legacy of hope and action. The dandelions had spread their seeds, golden flowers growing in society's cracks, beauty from ashes, wealth from wisdom. The last scene belongs to a child, one of many helped by the foundation. 8-year-old Marcus Thompson, named for a doctor who delivered him free when his mother couldn't pay, stood in the Hartwell home's garden helping plant vegetables that would feed the current residents. "Why do we share?" he asked the house manager. "Because everything we have is borrowed," she replied, echoing lessons learned from Walter and Evelyn. "We're just temporary keepers, making sure good things reach the people who need them." The boy considered this, then carefully planted another seed. In years to come, he would grow up to manage the foundation, extending its reach to new communities, new needs, new possibilities. The treasure continued its work, transformed from hidden gold to living legacy. And somewhere, in whatever exists beyond death's door, Clarence Mitchell, Walter and Evelyn Hartwell, and all the forgotten ancestors whose sacrifices made survival possible, watch their descendants choose generosity over greed, connection over isolation, purpose over profit. The treasure had been found, but more importantly, it had found the right people, those who understood that wealth's true value lay not in having it, but in sharing it, not in climbing away from others, but in lifting them up. In the end, that was Clarence's greatest gift, not the millions hidden in walls and under floors, but the wisdom hidden in the search itself, that those who have known hunger feed others, that those who have been forgotten remember, that those who have been abandoned create family wherever love takes root. The dandelions bloom still, golden faces turned toward the sun, seeds ready to ride the wind to wherever they're needed most. The treasure spreads, multiplied beyond counting, a fortune that grows with each giving, each kindness, each recognition that we are all family in our common humanity. And in a small town cemetery, copper roses grow wild on 3 graves, their blooms testament to a love that transformed abandonment into abundance, poverty into purpose, and hidden treasure into endless possibility. I hope you've been as moved by Walter and Evelyn's incredible journey as I have. Sometimes the greatest treasures aren't just what we find, but what we become in the searching. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss our next amazing tale. And don't forget to check out one of these 2 incredible stories on your screen right now. I promise they're just as captivating. Until next time, remember that sometimes the most valuable inheritance is the wisdom to know what truly matters.